This is a Hollywood blockbuster starring Jet Li, and it is also a rare movie with a positive Chinese image. A Chinese policeman named Liu Jian was ordered to go to Paris to assist the French police in investigating a cocaine smuggling case. I came to France all the way and met Richard, the head of the French police who I wanted to assist. Liu Jian also witnessed the brutal beating of a suspect by Richard and his men. Seeing the scene in front of him, Liu Jian looked very calm. When handling the case, Richard pulled out a gun and killed the suspect in front of Liu Jian. Only then did Liu Jian fully understand that it turned out that Richard was the mastermind behind the cocaine smuggling. The monitor in the room was turned off by Richard's order, but it couldn't be turned off no matter what. In this way, Richard's hands on record was left behind, and Liu Jian sensed something was wrong, so he ran away from the hotel room. Richard's men chased him down and found him hiding in a laundry room. Richard hurriedly sent someone down. One of his subordinates thought it was too dangerous to go down, so he flinched a little and was shot dead by Richard. Then he ordered another of his men to go down. This subordinate propped up his arms on the windowsill and was about to jump when he turned around and found Liu Jian hiding above his head. However, before he could react, Liu Jian kicked him down. Richard confirmed that Liu Jian was hiding somewhere above. Richard asked for a lighter from his subordinates and immediately set fire to the entire channel of the window where Liu Jian was, in an attempt to burn him to death. Richard threw a grenade at Liu Jian's position, but Liu Jian kicked it into the man's sleeve. Richard was afraid that his subordinates would hurt him, so Richard pushed that subordinate to the fire. The body of that subordinate along with the entire laundry room was reduced to ashes in a few seconds. Liu Jian used the table to resist those people. During the fight, an iron was also burned in the face of one of the men. Just got rid of the thugs and came to the hotel lobby. Unexpectedly, there are Richard's men here. I saw him set up his submachine gun and shoot at Liu Jian. Liu Jian reacted quickly and saved his life. He fled outside the hotel and immediately got under a car that was about to leave. When Richard chased him out angrily and kicked the car door angrily, he didn't know that Liu Jian escaped under the car under his feet. The French policeman became a drug lord by himself, and even the Chinese policemen who assisted in handling the case were not spared and wanted to kill people on the spot. Fortunately, Liu Jian was very skilled, escaped safely with the surveillance video. On the other side, Richard followed two assistants who contacted the Chinese ambassador because the assistants had always supported Liu Jian. When Richard's men saw Liu Jian hand the disc into the assistant's hands, the assistant was shot dead. Liu Jian got up and ran away, and those people chased after him ferociously. In an emergency, Liu Jian picked up a stool and smashed the cabin of the yacht. He escaped from there. Liu Jian hid quickly, and some masked people with knives continued to attack him above. Later, Richard also drove over, holding a gun in his hand and shooting at Liu Jian continuously. Fortunately, Liu Jian has all the kung fu, and finally managed to escape to the underground passage and escape by subway. Liu Jian only suffered a little skin trauma. Back at the residence, a woman named Jessica took the initiative to stitch up Liu Jian's wound. They didn't know each other before. After Jessica sewed up Liu Jian's wound, she was about to go out. Unexpectedly, a few men came in to make trouble and raised their hands to beat Jessica. Liu Jian ruthlessly grabbed the man's wrist and knocked him down. He raised his leg and kicked the other man down. Another muscular man came in. This man was infinitely strong, and in a competition of strength, Liu Jian had no advantage. But Liu Jian quickly discovered this person's weakness in the fight, and he quickly launched an attack, and the person was knocked down. This time, one of Richard's subordinates drove by and happened to find Liu Jian in the house, so he got out of the car quickly, took out the machine gun from the car, and fired continuously at the house. The room was filled with smoke, so he stopped and walked into the room to check the situation. Liu Jian suddenly appeared in the mist with chopsticks in his hands before he could react. The two chopsticks in Liu Jian's hand had already been inserted into his throat. Immediately afterwards, Jessica and Liu Jian escaped from the house, and they walked by the river to communicate. Liu Jian learned that Jessica was also a witness to the murder in the hotel. He hoped that Jessica could help to testify, and Jessica hoped that Liu Jian could rescue her daughter. The two hit it off. Therefore, Jessica pretended to go back to Richard's arms and used a clever trick to steal the tape from Richard's hand and hand it to Liu Jian. Finally, Liu Jian accompanied Jessica to the kindergarten where her daughter was. Jessica came to her daughter's bed excitedly, and she lifted the quilt excitedly. When embracing her daughter, it turned out that Richard's subordinates appeared after the quilt was lifted. The man stood up and pointed a gun at Jessica's head. Jessica turned pale with fright. At this moment, Liu Jian was thinking of how to rescue Jessica while fighting Richard and his men, so Liu Jian thought of a way to cut off the power. Under the darkness, everyone was in a panic. Liu Jian ran to the windowsill with Jessica. Liu Jian tied one end of the wooden frame with cloth strips and tied himself all the way. Then he took Jessica by hand and sent it from the window to the ground. Jessica was finally rescued from Richard's clutches by Liu Jian. However, Jessica was shot. Liu Jian came to the hospital with Jessica in his arms. Jessica stayed in the hospital recuperating her body. Liu Jian walked into the police building aggressively and started killing the security guards who blocked him from the first floor. The police on the first floor were knocked down one by Liu Jian before they could figure out the situation. Just as he was about to go to the second floor, a dozen policemen quickly ran down from the second floor. Liu Jian turned and hid in a room and locked the door. When he locked the door, he turned his head and found dozens of Taekwondo masters holding weapons and staring at him viciously. This time, Liu Jian did not panic, but extremely calm, took off his coat very calmly, and rolled up his sleeves. Then, he beat a Taekwondo player first and took the 2 sticks from that Taekwondo player. Liu Jian held the 2 sticks and fought with the other team members very calmly. In the end, they were defeated by Liu Jian again. When the police outside the door broke in, there were scenes of colleagues being knocked down in front of them. Liu Jian took the elevator upstairs, and there were 2 more powerful brothers waiting for him. The best thing about those 2 brothers is their legwork. However, the legwork needs to be displayed in a larger space. During the fight between Liu Jian and those 2 brothers, Liu Jian was always at a disadvantage. Later, Liu Jian discovered their weakness, so he led them into a narrow space, causing them to be unable to use their legs, and finally died in Liu Jian's hands. Liu Jian managed to break into Richard's room at last. At this time, Richard held Jessica's daughter tightly in his arms and pointed a gun at the little girl's head. The little girl was too scared to make a sound in his arms, and Richard thought he could kill Liu Jian while taking hostages. Liu Jian rushed to Richard's back, spat out a thin needle in his mouth, and pierced Richard's back into the back of his neck. At this point, Richard couldn't move. Liu Jian told him that the needle had penetrated into his dead point. This move is called Dragon's Kiss, and it can instantly control people's movements, making them immobile. At the same time, it blocks the blood of the person, so that the blood of the whole body flows to the top of the head, and then explodes to death. Richard didn't care at first, but after a while, he was trembling all over, bleeding from his 7 orifices, and fell to the ground dead. Liu Jian came to Jessica's ward with the baby in his arms. Jessica was finally reunited with her daughter, and Liu Jian made the trip worthwhile and successfully completed this arduous and great task.